You're listening to the Jefferson Exchange. Thanks for joining us. The JX starts today with the debrief, where JPR reporters discuss the stories they've been covering this week, including another lawsuit against Asante Rogue Regional Medical Center, the ongoing threat of lead poisoning to California condors, and new data from the Oregon Department of Education. I'm Liam Moriarty, JPR's interim news director.
I'm Roma Battaglia, Science, Environment, and Condor reporter.
I'm Justin Higginbottom, Public Health and Safety reporter.
And I'm Jane Vaughn, Housing, Homelessness, and Education reporter.
Excellent. How's everybody doing?
Excellent.
Good.
All right. Jane, let's start with you. This week you covered the release of an annual data report from Oregon's Department of Education. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this data comes out every year from ODE. They call it their At a Glance School and District Profiles. And so this is covering last academic year, 2023 to 2024, and that data just got released this week. And they say it's at a glance, but really it's much more than at a glance. There is so much data that they release. We have a link to it in my story on our website if any listeners are curious.
It's immense.
It's a ton of data. They have attendance, they have test scores, graduation rates, enrollment, staffing, and then you can break it down by grade, by ethnicity, by different student group, by district, by school. So it's really extensive. It's a lot of data. And of course, talking to administrators, they say that data is only a piece of the picture, qualitative versus quantitative, but it does still tell us some interesting things.
So what does the data show in terms of student attendance?
So there is actually some good news in terms of student attendance here in Oregon, and there were some modest increases in student attendance after there was a huge drop-off during the COVID pandemic. So in last academic year, there were about 2/3 of students in Oregon statewide who attended school more than 90% of the time. So if you're attending more than 90% of the time, you're considered a regular attender. It's a good thing. And so last year, there were about 2/3 of students statewide who were doing that, which is an increase over the previous school year of about 4%. So that's good. More students are going to school, but that number is still about 14% lower than it was before the pandemic, which is really pretty stark. So good news and bad news. Student attendance is still so much lower than it was pre-COVID, 2018-19-ish.
I imagine they're pretty concerned about that.
Yeah, and it is kind of a balance, right? I talked to the Medford School District Deputy Superintendent Jean Grazioli, who sent me a statement, and she said that the pandemic really sort of reshaped routines and attitudes about school attendance. Some families have financial challenges. Sometimes the older students are taking on new responsibilities like childcare or jobs. And also she said that the stay home if you're sick mentality has kind of stuck. So people might be staying home with the sniffles when really they could or should be going to school. And there are some districts that are doing better than others. So here in Southwestern Oregon, we've got Central Point School District 6, which is slightly above the statewide average in terms of attendance. And I talked to their superintendent, Walt Davenport, who says they've really tried to focus on attendance as an important metric. They have incentives. They'll have things like parties for good attendance. And, he says they also have very engaging classroom instruction, which helps. So, yeah, to your point, Liam, he was saying that it's, not great that we're so much lower than we were pre-COVID, but he counted this year as a victory because for his district, attendance has increased since the previous school year. So we're slowly increasing and marching back up to where we were pre-COVID.
That's good news. Any other interesting insights emerged from that data?
So one other thing in this massive data that I found especially interesting was about the percentage of ninth grade students who are considered to be on track to graduate high school, which means they've basically gotten a quarter of their credits done. They're on track. So that number is up to almost 85% statewide. And we've got some good news specifically in our region too. So Phoenix Talent School District 4 ranked especially high. They have over 93% of their ninth graders are on track to graduate. And their superintendent, Brent Berry, said they've really worked hard on that transition from middle school to high school, which can be really difficult for kids. So they have something called link leaders, so the older students kind of mentoring the younger students with that transition. They have graduation coaches, they have counselors, they're monitoring attendance, so they've really worked on that, and obviously that paid off, and you can see that in the data. But then there are some other schools in our region that were sort of below the statewide average. So Medford School District only has about 74% of its ninth graders on track to graduate high school. Brookings Harbor School District is about 73%, and then Klamath Falls City Schools has under 65%. So kind of a mixed bag, but there's a lot of data there.
Excellent. Thanks, Jane. Appreciate it. Justin, you covered yet another lawsuit against Asante Rogue Regional Medical Center. This is about the drug diversion case you've been covering. Tell us about this suit.
Yeah, so the latest complaint against the hospital is asking for $22 million in damages for 3 victims. And like previous civil lawsuits against the hospital, it claims Asante just didn't do enough to prevent a nurse there from swapping patients' fentanyl with non sterile tap water. This is a case we've been covering for the last year. Everyone's been covering this. Just for a bit of background, though, the allegations involve a former nurse, Danny Marie Schofield, who's accused of diverting drugs from dozens of patients, really, over the span of more than a year. She was charged by Medford police in June with 44 counts of assault in the second degree. Each one of those charges is for an alleged victim. And police say 16 of those patients died due to infections when their IV drip of fentanyl was replaced with this non-sterile tap water. This new complaint doesn't go much into detail about the 3 alleged victims, except to claim 2 of them died under Schofield's care.
So this is just the latest lawsuit against Asante. Can you give us a rundown of what the hospital is facing at this point?
Yeah, at this point, they're facing over $488 million in civil lawsuits.
Wow.
The largest complaint includes 18 plaintiffs, and that's for over $300 million. And so far, everyone but one former patient is also named in charges against the nurse. But we could see more civil suits come up because, by my count, there's still around 20 people that were named in that criminal indictment who aren't party yet to a civil lawsuit. So I'd expect to see these civil cases continue to be filed, and Schofield's criminal trial is starting sometime next year, early next year.
Right. So Asante's facing a huge liability from these lawsuits. You spoke with an expert about whether the hospital can survive if these lawsuits are successful. What did that expert tell you?
Yeah, I spoke with an expert on hospital finances at Johns Hopkins. And during the interview, actually, she brought up Asante's financial information. The hospital's a nonprofit, so all of this is public. And this expert told me that, yes, being sued for nearly $500 million is pretty rare, even though malpractice suits are normal. But it's not necessarily catastrophic for the hospital. Because remember, Asante is a huge provider. They had over $1 billion in revenue last year. Although this expert noted that they lost money actually last year on the operations side, so providing care to patients. But they made up for that with return on investments. This nonprofit has a big investment portfolio. So this expert actually said that these lawsuits aren't at risk of bringing down the hospital, at least in the short run, which is good news for people in the Rogue Valley because Asante is really the only option for a lot of healthcare procedures in the region.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks, Justin. Roman, you worked on an update to what's going on with the reintroduction of the California condor to Northern California. Sounds like there's still ongoing issues with lead poisoning.
Yeah, so this is about the reintroduction program run by the Yurok tribe since 2022. They've released a handful of condors into the wild in the Redwood National and State Parks. So the condors, we just found out, got lead poisoning in late October. We don't necessarily know from where this time. The speculation is that they saw the condors land on this unoccupied piece of property near a barn where there could have been poachers or people processing game that had lead in it. And condors, if people don't know, are scavengers. They eat dead animals. And hunters might shoot an animal with lead, might leave portions of the animal or leave the animal entirely. The lead gets in the animal, the condor eats the lead, and then the lead poisons the condor.
Gotcha.
So there were 9 condors found with these detectable lead levels in these fall health checks that they do. One had a potentially lethal amount and had to go to the Sequoia Park Zoo to get treatment. So lead is the greatest threat to condors out of any other threat. Combined with habitat destruction and the use of the pesticide DDT in the past, the worldwide condor population fell to just 27 in 1987. They were all captured and put in this captive breeding program, and they've been able to successfully reintroduce condors throughout the U.S. There are about hundreds in the wild now, but the threat of lead is still an issue. You know, there was another spate of lead poisoning last fall, too, so it's just another lead poisoning.
Sure. Well, I mean, that was a heroic effort to capture all the remaining ones in the wild, and they spent years trying to do that. So this is really the culmination of a long and arduous process that's worked remarkably well.
Yeah.
So to see lead still threatening it even years after banning that ammunition is somewhat discouraging. How are the condors doing right now?
Yeah, so the one condor that got sick enough that it needed treatment, this condor is known as A9, is doing good. That condor, I actually heard from a listener, I didn't include this in the story online, but might be important to note, was raised at the Oregon Zoo at their captive breeding program. So they completed their treatment finally and were released into the wild this week. This treatment called chelation treatment is really hard on the birds and it removes the lead really quickly. The other condors didn't need treatment because they're below that threshold. It's better for them to just naturally get rid of the lead in their systems. But, the big danger about lead poisoning is the increased risk of lead poisoning in the future. So the lead, even when they're naturally getting rid of it or using this treatment, it builds up in their bone marrow and it kind of gets stuck in their bodies. And so, the more they're eating this lead, the greater the risk that the lead poisoning is going to be lethal enough to kill them. So that's kind of why it's not just every time they eat lead, the risk increases that they could die. Gotcha.
So what has the tribe been doing to address the threat of lead poisoning in the area?
Yeah, so using lead bullets for hunting in California has been banned since 2019 for hunting, but I think not everyone might know about the ban, including ranchers who use guns for like pest control or getting rid of predators, but also poachers obviously don't necessarily care as much. Lead bullets are cheaper than other alternatives, and so it can be really hard to stop lead in the environment. The wildlife program director for the Yurok tribe said because of the lead threat, it requires a lot of tracking to stop the birds from eating lead. They have to track the birds with these GPS trackers, remove the lead from dead animals that are nearby, do education for gun owners. He talked about in the story that condors are really actually easy from a conservation standpoint because all you really have to do is get rid of the lead. Once you get rid of the lead, you don't need to do any of this work anymore. All of the work that they're doing is because of lead.
All boils down to that.
Yeah, DDT was banned in the 70s, so there's really only one major threat to condors right now. So they're still just working on removing that lead from that landscape so that the condors can thrive once again.
Thanks, Roman. Justin, you covered a story about a unique program for members of the Yurok tribe. The plan is to help Yurok members charged with a crime in Del Norte County. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, so this program defers prosecution for sub-tribe members if they enter a culturally focused diversion program. So if someone admits someone's been charged, they've admitted to their guilt, instead of just going to jail or having something on their criminal record permanently, they can opt to go through this program. And if they complete it, then that charge is dropped. It's scrubbed clean, which can help people later finding a job and stuff. But the program could include kind of traditional diversion, tactics like substance abuse treatment or help with housing or finding a job. A lot of crime in this area is related to drug use and poverty. There'll be caseworkers that check in very regularly, which is important because members can be in pretty rural areas in this region. The Yurok tribe is based near the town of Klamath in Del Norte County, near the coast. But what makes this program really unique is that it also has a cultural component to it. So tribe members will be encouraged to reconnect with their community and tribal history, and that could be through traditional fishnet making or collecting firewood for elders. I spoke with a Yurok judge, and she said something really interesting to me, actually. She described the county justice system and the historic concept of justice in the tribe is different. So American laws are more rights-based, she said, while the tribe has a responsibility-based attitude towards justice. What do you owe to your family and tribe? And this diversion program, in part, reminds members of their responsibility to their neighbors and how crime impacts them.
Interesting. So what have the results been so far of this program?
So the tribe signed a similar agreement with Humboldt County last year, and they've already been putting people through this diversion program on a limited basis in Del Norte. But this agreement kind of streamlines the process and makes it official. And the judge I spoke with said she's really encouraged by the results. It seems to be reducing recidivism, and she thinks this could be a model for other places in the state. They've had a handful of tribe members graduate from the program, and this program can last months or even up to years. But she said, again, she doesn't know if a similar program exists in the state, but this could be a model for other places.
That's really interesting, that concept you talked about with the differing concepts of justice between the tribal tradition and the American tradition. That's very interesting. All right. Thanks, Justin. I appreciate that. And that's it for the debrief this week. Thanks for listening. You can reach the newsroom with comments on our coverage and suggestions for things we should cover in the future through our news tip line. You can find that on our website at ijpr.org. And you can find this program and more on our website at jeffexchange.org or subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and all the other platforms.